So, uh, for the task at hand, I created a Amazon OpenSearch domain. First thing I noticed is that Amazon's service is not uh, called anymore Elasticsearch. Now it's OpenSearch, and it has some little differences, but it's still Elasticsearch. It's just a fork from that project. And yeah, the first job was to upload the data that it was in the folder that came with the in the email from the challenge. And the first thing I noticed is that uh, the bulk API that you have to use to interact with the Amazon domain, it has a very specific format for it to work. This XMD JSON that I read in the documentation, I didn't know about this format. It's new for me. Uh, and it has something like this. Of course, the data came in the case of management data, that management JSON came like this, and I had to use a little tool from Node.js to automate this format, the creation of this kind of format. And yes, my first attempt with the bulk API was to send this request and also for properties JSON in the same format through Postman. And for some reason, it didn't work at all. I tried in a lot of ways, made a lot of research what could have been uh, wrong on my side. But after long and a lot of tries, I decided to try it with the interface from Amazon, from my domain that I created. So yeah, this is the interface, and this worked instantly. So instead of taking more time in trying to make it work through Postman or making a code on Visual Studio to make an automated upload, I uploaded everything through this console, both files, management.json and properties.json. So I populated with data my domain so I could start working on designing the query that I wanted to make through the API. So once the data was up in the domain, I started learning about the search API. And yes, in the upload step, I made two indexes, one for management and one for property. So here I have my URL from the domain. And here I have the two indexes that I just mentioned and the simple search URL. And from here, I made a multi-match query where I search every field from both indexes. I made a little query, very simple, in this case, East. And I used a filter for filtering the market field in both management and property indexes. And I started trying different queries to get to know the API and its format. So here it returned the data I just uploaded to the domain. Well, this is the domain's API. I'm interacting directly with it. So what I did was a little project on Visual Studio, .NET Core. It's .NET, but .NET Core. In the build I have, yeah. So I made this project. It has a little a little controller with just one method, and that will go to my business logic that will map the input request to the client's request that will interact with the OpenSearch API. I'll just run this, go and debug it, put a breakpoint there. You have my Swagger documentation. And I'm gonna go to Smart Search. This is my local host, Smart Search, the API you show in Visual Studio. I just made the same simple request. I hit send, hits here to my breakpoint, gets the request, then goes to my business logic layer and initializes the client that will interact with the API. Going to map to the client request. Gonna go to the client, search data. This is my client layer and client class, better said. Yes, the endpoint and endpoint access come from my app settings JSON. Well, I'm showing you my password right now, but I will take down the domain. If you want to try with the same domain, I can turn it on again, it's no problem. Go back to the client. Here I used REST Sharp to make the request. I create JSON. Here's the request I'm doing to the Amazon OpenSearch API. You have I use a multi-match with a filter for market. Here are the mapped fields that you saw in this little request for the search phrase east, which is the query, the market for the filter, and the limit for the results. Here's the size, we got 3, query will be east, and here we have the filter value. I'm just gonna hit continue now, so we see the result in Postman. There you have it. Park East, well, San Diego, San Francisco. Yeah, of course. It's a very little example and a very little API. A little more time with the query language that Elastic uses, I could make a much more efficient query and a little more simple or optimized, I would say. But yeah, here I have a functional little API that interacts with my Amazon OpenSearch domain, which has the data that was here in the folder from the challenge.